tomorrow. So you're going to hear tonight from William Skip Arbuckle and Jack Humphrey. You know both of them, and I don't really believe in introductions much anyway. So Judge Arbuckle is a former federal magistrate judge and one of the, always thought, one of the most thoughtful people on the bench. And the other thing I really admire and respect is that Judge Arbuckle has been involved and stayed involved in the Bar Association. Has remained involved, will remain involved. We're not going to get rid of him. He's going to be here to talk to us and offer guidance and assistance, especially and including to younger lawyers. So I think it's a very important role. Jack Humphrey, you all know, is a partner in our firm. We won't hold that against him. A graduate of UVA, where he's editor-in-chief of the Law Review. Actually, Jack's the only person I ever heard of who was offered a football scholarship to Princeton. Is that right? I have that right? That's what you told me.
Yeah. I lied.
Well, I believe it's probably
I thought I would get a scholarship, but I didn't get it.
All right, so I'll turn it over to Judge Arbuckle.
Thank you, Cliff. Boy, I said to my wife when we were coming over here that there'll be 10 people there if we're lucky. So it's wonderful to see such a great crowd, and hopefully you're a little bit curious as I try and answer 3 questions. First, what is a magistrate judge? A federal magistrate judge. Second, what does a federal magistrate judge do? And third, the topic that Cliff asked me to speak on, how the heck did I get to be a federal magistrate judge? So the first question, what is a federal magistrate judge? To understand what a FMJ or MJ is, we have to understand the evolution of the federal court system. In the 1787 Constitution of the United States, nobody here was around when, well, maybe 1 or 2 of you, when that was passed. It creates our 3 branches of government. Article 1, the executive or the legislative branch. Article 2, the executive branch. And Article 3, the judicial branch. And I'd like to read just 2 short passages. Article 3, Section 1 of the United States Constitution. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may, from time to time, ordain and establish. So one Supreme Court and inferior courts as Congress may, from time to time, ordain and establish. And then Section 2 is the judicial power, and it extends to all the things that federal courts are permitted to do. So if it's what Congress ordains to establish, we look to Article 1, Section 8, and way down in the guts of Article 1, Section 8, Congress starts with the worst one: Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. But later on in there, it says to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. So the Article 3 says one Supreme Court and inferior courts as Congress ordains and establishes. And then Section 1, or Article 1, Section 8, constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. Well, that's 1787. 2 years later, in 1789, the Judiciary Act created officially the Supreme Court, then 7 justices, the circuit courts, also the district courts. So we now have our 3-tiered system: Supreme Court, Circuit Court, District Courts. And I think most folks don't remember, and I didn't, frankly, until I was preparing for this talk, that act also created the Attorney General of the United States, the United States Attorneys, and the United States Marshals. So by 1789, we've got our courts sort of laid out. I think it's really interesting that the first time the Supreme Court of the United States met, they all got together, but they had no cases because there were no appeals. And so they decided to go out and ride the circuit and help generate some business for the court, which is what they did. Well, imagine in the late 1700s, early 1800s, you're arrested here in Williamsport. The closest judge who can set bail is in Philadelphia. There's no TV, there's no Zoom, there's no telephones. You know, you have to wait for that judge to come around, which might be twice a year, to just get bail. And then they would set a trial. So, explaining that problem, in 1793, Congress authorized the circuit courts to appoint discrete persons learned in the law. Notice it doesn't say lawyers. It says discrete persons learned in the law to take bail in criminal cases. And that's what they did. And every town had somebody that the court had appointed who would set bail when the marshals arrested somebody with a federal offense. 20 years later, in 1812, Congress authorized these discrete persons learned in the law to accept affidavits in criminal cases. So they could issue warrants based on affidavit. You remember the Fourth Amendment, no warrant shall issue except upon probable cause, supported by oath and affirmation, describing with particularity the person or place to be seized and the person or place to be searched. So that's where we were until 1894. Imagine if you're in Yellowstone Park in Wyoming, and the park ranger charges you with taking a bear out of season. The closest judge is on the other side of Wyoming, and he doesn't have to go to Yellowstone Park twice a year. And so Congress, to solve this problem, created a position just in Yellowstone Park where the discrete person learned in the law, not even called a judge at this point, still a commissioner, could try federal charges on federal land just in Yellowstone. Well, that was so effective that 80 years later, after the Yellowstone appointment, but then 2 years later, Congress looked around and said, this is too inefficient, and we now are starting to get a lot of cases. And so they authorized not the circuit courts, but the district courts to appoint a guy, always were guys back then, called a commissioner. And the commissioner had limited authority to take affidavits and to set bail. And they were paid a fee for each warrant they issued and each time they set bail. And it would be paid by the party that they issued the warrant on or set the bail on. And that was the way it was. In 1940, 44 years later, they decided this works so well, we're going to let these commissioners try all of the petty offenses on federal land, not just out at Yellowstone, but anywhere. So the Army Depot, the federal parks, the Army Corps of Engineer dams, things like that, the commissioners could hear those offenses. 28 years later, in 1968, we see now the evolution from these scattered commissioners with very limited authority to the 1968 Federal Magistrates Act. It created this position of a federal magistrate. That was the title. It established salaries, not fees, required that they be a lawyer, not just a discrete person learned in the law. And they were given broad authority in each district. Each district of the United States can establish rules for what types of cases they could hear, consistent with the Constitution. And then 10 years later, because remember Congress had the authority to create inferior courts, they created the bankruptcy court in 1978, so that the district court judges would not have to hear bankruptcy cases. And where will those judges come from? They'll be appointed by the circuit, and they still are today appointed by the circuit. Well, in 1990, the name was officially changed to federal magistrate judge. Here in Williamsport, our first commissioner was Bill Askey. Some of you may have remember Bill. He was a part-time commissioner from 1964 to 1971. Remember I said the Magistrate Judge Act was 1968, but our district didn't think it was important enough to change his job or his title until 71, and in 71 they did, and he was a part-time magistrate judge until 2007, serving for 43 years here in Williamsport as either a commissioner or a federal magistrate judge. I was appointed in 2008 as a part-time, 1 day a week was what it was, and I continued to practice law until 2016 when the job became full-time, and we'll talk in a minute if we have time as to how you get one of those jobs. Just to give you some sense, nationwide today, there are 531 full-time and 20 part-time magistrate judges in the United States. Some of those part-timers, like in some of the islands out in the Pacific, also serve as the clerk of courts because, you know, there's just not enough work. So 531 and 20. In 1971, when Bill Askey became the first magistrate judge here in Williamsport, the numbers were completely reversed. There were only about 25 full-time magistrate judges in the United States, and everywhere else they were part-time. Sort of a remnant of the commissioner system where every town had one. But as they got more responsibilities and consolidated, we have what we have today, 531 full-time and only 20 in the whole United States part-time. Here in the Middle District, we have 5 full-time magistrate judges, but we've got more work than 5 can handle, and there is a process called recall, where a retired judge can be recalled back to active duty. And we have one, Marty Carlson down in Harrisburg is serving full-time as our 6th magistrate judge. So what does a magistrate judge do? The second question. The statute that created us, 28 U.S.C. 636, the 1968 Federal Magistrate Judge Act, Magistrates Act, sets out specific duties and referral duties and consent duties. Specific duties, referral duties, and consent duties. And the specific duties are in the criminal field. The magistrate judge is authorized to issue search warrants, to issue arrest warrants, to supervise the grand jury, to appoint lawyers, to conduct initial appearances, detention hearings, set bail, try misdemeanor cases, try petty offense cases. One of the more interesting things we do is international prisoner transfer cases. The United States has treaties with most civilized countries in the world. And when an American citizen is arrested in Brunei or in England or in who knows where, once they've been convicted and sentenced, you can apply through the embassy to have your case transferred back to the United States for punishment. And the United States agrees that if a citizen of your country is arrested, convicted, and sentenced, they can be transferred back to your country to serve the sentence at home, not here in the United States. And we do a lot of those here in Williamsport because we have the 4 prisons right down the road, the 3 in Allenwood plus Lewisburg. So we get a lot of those international prisoner transport or transfers. And, you know, there's a script of 15 questions we have to ask them, and if they say yes to all of them, then we recommend that they get transferred. We also are authorized in the criminal area to take felony pleas and to conduct felony motions, but only as a referral on what we call the R&R, and I'll explain that. So our statute says we have consent, or we have regular jurisdiction, which is almost exclusively in the criminal area, and then also the ability to serve as a special master. But then, on referral, what does that mean? The district judges have way too many cases. So they can take a case when it's filed and refer it to a magistrate judge for what's called pretrial management. All the early motions and motion to dismiss, motion for summary judgment. Well, I can't grant those, but I can write a report and recommendation. And that report and recommendation then goes to the district judge, who makes a decision whether they want to adopt it in whole or in part, or refuse it. Well, that is a pretty inefficient system, but there's a clause in the Magistrate Judge Act that says, unless all the parties consent. And if all the parties consent, then the federal magistrate judge becomes the judge for the trial court, and appeals from my decision go to the circuit, not to the district court. So in every county, or every district, I want to say county, every district, and there's 72, I think, districts, each of them have their own rules. I have colleagues in Texas who have never done anything but arraign people on improper entry or illegal entry. That's all they do. They don't do any civil cases. They don't have jury trials. They don't try misdemeanor cases. And then you have places like Williamsport, which has, in the Middle District, which has been very aggressive in allowing direct referrals to magistrate judges and a consent system that encourages the parties to try the case in front of a magistrate judge. In civil cases, this has become very important, because in criminal cases, their schedule is governed by what's called the Speedy Trial Act. And the Speedy Trial Act requires that their case be brought to jury within so many days. And with the felony load that our judges have, they find it hard to find time to squeeze in civil trials. But the magistrate judges have more time in that sense, and so they do. And when I say we have more time for consents, one of the things that in our district, 96% of the Social Security appeals are handled by magistrate judges on consent. Well, you know, if you apply for Social Security and you're old, like me, they give you your Social Security and they calculate, you know, what you get, and you get a check every month. But if you apply for disability, there's a multi-step process. And you have an initial hearing, and if you disagree, you get a second hearing, and then you ask for an administrative law judge, and then that administrative law judge has a hearing, listens to the evidence, and decides, are you disabled? If they say no, you have to appeal to the Appeals Council in Washington, D.C., and they say, are you disabled or not? And if they say no, then and only then can the person who claims to be disabled apply to the federal district court. But it is not a new trial, it's an appeal. And the appeal is stacked in favor of the government, because the decision has to be, is the decision of the commissioner, and the commissioner of Social Security is in whose name all these people act, is it supported by substantial evidence? Or was there an error of law? And if I answer it's supported by substantial evidence and there's no error of law, I have to affirm it, even if I think the person's disabled. I don't get to decide that. And you think, well, what's the big deal? Well, we would get, each magistrate judge here in the Middle District gets at least 70 Social Security appeals a year. Well, that's, you know, 1.5 a week, you know, like 52 weeks. But these appellate records, because they've been through 4 stages, are 2,000 to 6,000 pages long, and they have to be reviewed. I don't review them. I have 2 attorney law clerks who work for me, and they review them, and they write up a memo, and then I look at their memo, I look at the briefs of the 2 parties, and then I try and decide the case on that limited standard. The last thing that we do a lot of, are mediations. When I started to practice back in the early 70s, if you had a dispute, you could count on it would go to trial. But ADR, alternate dispute resolution, has grown exponentially. Trials are expensive, they take too long, and then you got to worry about an appeal. So one of the major ADRs which we've embraced here in the Middle District is a mediation program. And a mediation judge, I always tell people, look, I'm your mediation judge. I'm only going to make 2 decisions, when we go to lunch and when we're done. Those are the only decisions I make. If there are any other decisions, you're going to make them, and my job is to help you come together, to come up with something you can live with, not something necessarily that you love. And we get some training on how to do that, and 4 years ago I went to a training, and the guy who was leading the training, we were in Chicago, said, you should keep track of your cases, because you're going to get the same adjusters, insurance adjusters, you're going to get the same lawyers, and it's helpful to remember who they are and what they did. So for the last 4 years, I kept a chart, an Excel spreadsheet of my mediations. And in the last 4 years, I mediated 135 cases. The total settlements were $16,468,732, or an average of $173,000 plus per case. Those were all cases that did not have to go to trial. The Williamsport vicinity, and so what can't a magistrate judge do? On consent, we can do anything except 2 things. Can't issue injunctions, and can't make the final decisions on class actions. Because obviously if it's a large class, how do you get everybody to consent? And you have to consent. But other than that, you know, jury trials, non-jury trials, Social Security appeals, all of that stuff. One last thing about Williamsport. The Middle District of Pennsylvania, which came out of the Western District, used to be Pennsylvania was divided, Philadelphia and the collar counties, and then the rest of the state. In 1901, it was divided up, and the center of the state became the Middle District of Pennsylvania. And each of that, in that district, we have what we call vicinages, and we have 3. The Harrisburg vicinage, the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre vicinage, and the Williamsport vicinage. The Williamsport vicinage is 13 counties, or 9,232 square miles, which is an area bigger than Rhode Island, Delaware, and Connecticut combined, just in our district.
Vicinage.
Just in our vicinage, yeah. I said district, I meant vicinage. Okay, the last question, that'll be the shortest. How did I get here? Well, through a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings. But, I started life in Erie, Pennsylvania, born and raised an Erie kid. Went to Grove City College and decided late that I wanted to go to law school. Got accepted in May, because I didn't apply until May, to University of Akron. So I moved to Akron and graduated from law school there. While I was in law school, I was poor, like most law students, and so I needed a job, and there was a sign on the board that the prosecutor's office in Portage County, which is the next county over where Kent State is, you know, where Akron and Kent, they had a job in the DA's office and it paid. think it was like $2.05 an hour. But that was, you know, that was real money. And so I applied and got that job and started there. And in my second week, I got a license as an intern. And in my second week, the lawyer who was supervising me said, come on, let's go to court. And we went over to the Ravenna Municipal Court. And there were 10 or 15 cases that day. And he said, here, try this case. I looked at it. I'm, you know, not quite a third-year law student yet. It was a dog-at-large case. There was a municipal ordinance that required that if you don't keep your dog on a leash, you have violated the ordinance. And there was this German Shepherd who kept dumping on his neighbor's lawn. And the lady followed him back to the house, and when he got let in the house, she called the dog warden. And so here we have the case. I got the dog warden who knocked on the door, and the guy said, I'm the owner. And I got the homeowner who said, this dog on my lawn. And the judge found him guilty. We're going through, the supervising lawyer hands me another file. It says another dog-at-large case. The exact same case, but in a different municipality with a different ordinance. But same problem, guilty verdict. We go back to the office, and this is where you got to, you know, I wanted to try cases. But this is where you got to be careful what you pray for. The boss said, how'd it go your first day in court? Pretty good. And my supervising attorney said, he got 2 guilty verdicts. What were they? He said, dog-at-large cases. He said, Skip, you are our dog-at-large prosecutor. And for 2 years, every case that the dog warden brought was my responsibility. Nobody else ever talked to him but me. So you got to be careful. Well, I left there and went to the public defender's office, and from there, the Akron paid more, so I went to the Akron public defender's office, and after a year or two, the DA, who was called a prosecutor in Ohio, said, why don't you come work for us? And so I worked for them, and eventually I wanted to go back to Erie, my hometown, and so I moved back to Erie and got a job at the Knox firm, which is a big civil litigation firm. In those days, mostly meant insurance defense. And so I did that for a number of years. Got a call from a guy named Roy Zimmerman. Pennsylvania Constitution was amended, and Pennsylvania had its first elected Attorney General. And Roy, I knew Roy, and he, because I had been to a prosecutor's school that he was an instructor at. And he called me and said, Skip, in 1981, you know, I just got elected and we're starting this first statewide criminal division for the Attorney General's office. There had never been one. He said, would you like to come to Harrisburg and be a part of that? And I said, Roy, I'd be very interested, but you have to send me a map. I've never been to Harrisburg. And so he, all right, come on down. And Penny and I moved to Harrisburg and worked there at the Attorney General's office. After his first term, I went into private practice for a year and a half and was doing mostly family law and federal bankruptcy work. And that was interesting, but my old boss from the Attorney General's office called me and said, have you read in the paper about that roofer scandal in Philadelphia? Well, it was all the news, of course. And I said yes, and he said, if you come back to state government for 1 year, I will let you try the roofer's case, because he was the head of what was then the Judicial Inquiry and Review Board, and among all the people that were charged, there were 19 judges who had accepted cash envelopes from a member of the roofers union. And that was, people thought, maybe not the right way for a judge to celebrate Christmas. So, you know, I said okay and talked to Penny, and we took that job. 8 years later, after the last appeal, my boss retired. I became the head of the Judicial Inquiry and Review Board, and Pennsylvania's Constitution was amended again, and this time it created the Judicial Conduct Board. So I was counsel for the Conduct Board. But I was, you know, getting to be in my late 40s, and I'm thinking, I don't want to work for government the rest of my life. I wanted to be a lawyer's lawyer. And I had a friend in State College, and Penny's from Greensburg. I'm from Erie. We didn't want to live in a big city, but we didn't want to live in the sticks. State College seemed like a good tie, so we moved there. And I practiced there until I was appointed here in Williamsport. I looked it up. I only had how many? I think I only had 36 cases from 1993 until 2008 here in federal court. I had had cases in the Western District and in the Eastern District, and I had a couple in Indiana, federal cases. But it wasn't that, but I think that my broad experience and the fact that so few people applied allowed me to become the federal magistrate judge here in Williamsport. And one of the joys of being the magistrate judge in Williamsport was the fact that I got to know, not as a lawyer in front of, but as a colleague, Malcolm Muir. And I will tell you, he was a fantastic judge and an even better colleague. And in my office at home, I have 2 big leather chairs. And on Fridays, I would go up to Malcolm's chambers, and he would come around from his desk, because he never wanted you to be sitting on side the desk. And he would sit in one chair, and I would sit in the other, and we would just talk about life for maybe an hour, hour and a half on Friday afternoons. But I know Jack Humphrey has a lot more Malcolm Muir stories, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. Thank you.
What a great introduction and segue, I have to say. So, November 6, 1970, after a very successful 32-year practice as an estates lawyer, estates and federal estate taxation, in Williamsport and surrounding areas, Malcolm Muir was sworn in as a United States District Court judge in the Middle District of Pennsylvania. He was appointed by President Richard Nixon, about whom Judge Muir often said, yes, President Nixon had some problems, had some faults, but he was a remarkable judge of character. Over the next 40 years, Judge Muir basically revolutionized how cases filed in federal court were handled, were tried, were disposed of, and he did this through a case management system which he devised, implemented, strictly enforced, year after year, continuously improved, and that case management system became really the fare of how things were done in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and really throughout many other courts, state courts and federal courts. It served as an example as to how cases can be efficiently processed through the system, a problem that was very evident at the time he took the bench. By the time he passed away in July 22, 2011, he was at that point 96 years of age, the second oldest federal judge in the entire country. At that time, he was widely acclaimed as a pioneer in the efficient administration of justice. I knew him reasonably well, certainly as a judge from the time that he hired me for a 2-year clerkship in 1972. Thereafter, my wife Karen and I decided to live in this area, practice in this area, and my practice included a large number of criminal and civil cases, which I tried in federal court before Judge Muir. In the later years of his life, Karen and I actually became, I would say, personal friends of the judge. We were no longer trying cases in front of him. He had discontinued that part of his judicial duties, but we became very friendly with him, went out to dinner with him, and so forth. So I had a personal relationship with him. And because of, I guess, how I knew George Muir, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I have a couple people here who've known him at least twice as long as I did, but they're not here talking, I am. So I would have to say that because of that, I was asked to give this talk on the life and legacy of Judge Malcolm Muir. Well, I can't really do that, I'm sorry. I've given many talks on the judge. I did the resolutions with the Law Association when he passed away. I did his eulogy with funding from the Lycoming Law Association. I helped put together a basically 1-hour documentary of the life and legacy of Judge Malcolm Muir. So if anyone really wants to know all about that part of him, I urge you to take a look at the film. Here. This is the film. This is on DVD. Nobody does that anymore. But the Lycoming Law Association has agreed that they will be putting out that on their YouTube channel. And if you're really interested in the whole schmear, then take a look at that. Take a look at that video. It's actually fairly good. So I'm not going to go into all the details. What I would like to do, however, with whatever time I have left, because I know that somewhere Judge Muir is timing this. What I'd like to do is just tell some Judge Muir stories. I think everyone, not everyone, most people who knew him, who tried cases in front of him, had at least one Judge Muir story. I've got several, and I'm going to just go over some of the ones that I enjoy. Before I do that, I would like to say that he was an extremely interesting man. He was very smart. He was very organized. He was a problem solver. If there was a problem, he really loved the opportunity of trying to solve it, usually through imposition of certain systems. He was a very systematic person. So he would solve the problems through whatever system he could devise. And he was also a person who really liked to challenge himself. So, 1932, he graduated from the Williamsport High School and went to Lehigh, well known for engineering. You would have expected the judge to be enrolled as an engineering student, to major in engineering. That's the type of school it was. That was the type of mind he had. Systems, solving problems, that type of thing. No, Judge Muir wanted to challenge himself. He majored in philosophy. When asked why philosophy, he said, well, I took a philosophy course my first year, didn't understand it. Took a philosophy course my second year, still didn't understand it. So I decided to major in philosophy, and frankly, I never understood it. Nevertheless, he did some amazing things while at Lehigh, and this is before, ultimately, he went to Harvard Law School and graduated from that, but before that, at Lehigh, he taught himself shorthand. And he used this throughout his career, both as a private lawyer and as a judge. I never knew a judge to do shorthand. Frankly, I never knew a lawyer who knew shorthand. But Judge Muir was very competent in shorthand. And he, in trials, he would take down long passages of argument or testimony, word for word, because he could take that down in shorthand and use it for whatever he wanted to use it. He decided that he wanted to memorize pi to 100 places. Now pi, we know what pi is, 3.14159, and then goes on infinitely after that in no repeatable pattern. He decided he wanted to learn pi to 100 places, and he did. And even well into his 80s or 90s, if somebody brought that up to him, he would be able to repeat to you pi to 100 places. I did it once, I regretted it, I'll never do it again, or never would do it again. He also devised a system by which, this is still at Lehigh, by which he could tell you the date of the week of any date in history. And it was, I think he devised it. He might have copied it from somewhere, I don't know. But this system involved taking whatever the date was. He ascribed, based on that date, a number of 5 numbers, the century, the month, the day, the number of leap years that were in the year before that, something else, 5 things that he could add up, divide by 7, and if the division turned out to be even, number 63, put 7 in, it's an even number, that's a Sunday. If there was a remainder of 1, that's a Monday. Remainder of 2, Tuesday, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure that most of you are interested in knowing how to do this. When we were trying cases before him, those who did it frequently would often give him the opportunity to demonstrate this skill that he had. So if a witness gave us a date, blah, 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 1954, I would say to him, what day of the week was that? And the witness, of course, said, I have no idea. You'd look up the Judge Muir, he would go like this, close his eyes, and literally in 15 or 20 seconds of doing these calculations in his head, he would say, well, that was a Tuesday. And we would say, oh, well, thank you, Judge. Judge Muir was very time-oriented. I think most lawyers are. I mean, many of us at least partially bill by the hour, by the quarter hour, by the 10th of an hour, whatever. So, time is in our brain. Well, it was very much in Judge Muir's brain. He was very strict in the timing of his trials. Trials started at 10 o'clock, ended at 4:30, half an hour and a half for lunch, 15-minute, break in the morning, 15-minute break in the afternoon. Each one of those things, those times were strictly enforced. When I say trial started at 10, it was 10. I mean, his chambers was next to the courtroom, and he would enter through his chambers into the courtroom at 10 o'clock as the grandfather clock in his office was chiming the 10 chimes. He would be walking through with his law clerks. And for every break, 15-minute break, this was timed at 15 minutes. You better be back there at 15 minutes. So he was very time-oriented, and in fact, he used a stopwatch frequently in court to time arguments, to time witnesses in their testimony. Actually, we have a copy of his. I mean, we not a copy. We have the actual stopwatch that Judge Muir used. This was lent to me by the Reeders Travis Law Firm. It's a permanent part of their Malcolm Muir conference room. But sometime after this stopwatch stopped working, he donated it for a fundraiser for the Lycoming Law Foundation. I thought there was going to be wild bidding on this thing. I put in the bid at $75, thinking, well, you know, whatever. It won for $75. No one else was interested, but I certainly was. But at any rate, this was the stopwatch that he used. Primarily, the main thing was like the time lawyers in their closing statements. So the case is done, I mean, the evidence is in, you're going to give a closing statement to the jury, and he says, how much time do you want? You know, I want a half an hour, I want 45 minutes, whatever it is. He says, fine. And it was going to be timed by this stopwatch. If you said half an hour, at half an hour, you were done. There was no way that you're going to go beyond that. He was very liberal in saying, for example, would you like some warning before I cut you off? And you'd say, yeah, I'd like some warning. You know, how much warning do you want? Well, 5 minutes would be good. So basically, you'd be giving your argument 5 minutes before he hit the end of his half an hour thing. He would say, Mr. Humphrey, you got 5 minutes left, and you better finish in that 5 minutes or you were cut off. I did witness at one time an assistant U.S. attorney, his name is Larry Kelly. He was giving a closing statement in a complicated criminal case. He had asked for an hour. He wanted 5 minutes at the end for a warning. And he was giving his thing, and he came down to 5 minutes. And warning, 5 minutes warning, Mr. Kelly, you have 5 minutes left. And Larry said, Judge, I think I have 10 or 15 minutes more. Can I have some more time? He says, no, Mr. Kelly, you now have 4 minutes and 45 seconds left. And instead of revising what he was going to say, Larry Kelly speeded up like 10 times faster than anybody could ever talk. Nobody ever understood a thing that he said. But by the time he finally said, thank you to the jury, he was totally exhausted, sat down his jury. Judge Muir, as I said, was very organized. Everything in his office, in his things he had to do in the office was pursuant to a tickler system, what they call a tickler system that he employed. A tickler system was a series, hundreds and hundreds of 3x5 cards that were in a drawer next to part of his desk. The drawer had divisions for every month and every day of every month. So the whole year was sorted out in places for days. And so he would put in a note on cards that he had to do something on some particular date, and it would be in a slot in this tickler system. If he got to it and he was supposed to do something and he couldn't do it, he would advance it, a couple of days to the next slot and so forth. So everything that was done in the office was scheduled on this tickler system. And it wasn't all judicial work, some of it was just personal things that he also did. For example, Judge Muir sent out, I would think, 100 or more, hundreds perhaps, birthday cards every year from his office. He sent them out to his family, to his friends, to his former law clerks. I mean, virtually every year, almost on my exact date, unless it was on his birthday, unless it was a Sunday, I would get this birthday card. It was usually a note card with maybe a depiction of some painting, And inside would be in a magic marker, sometimes different colored magic markers. Happy birthday, Jack, and signed by Malcolm Muir. He sent that out every single year, because that card came up like 4 days before my birthday, and every other card he sent out was pursuant to a card that came up on a certain date. So he saw the card, oh, it's Jack's birthday coming up. He would do the card, and he would tell his secretary Sharon to send it out, on a particular date, and it would usually arrive on my birthday. I looked at the card. He showed me the card, my birthday card, and it had 20 years. Every year, he wrote down not only the date, the year, but what card he sent to me. He usually got cards from for example, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which has Winslow Homer cards and blah, blah, blah. And each one is sort of characterized in the back as to what it is, and sometimes with a series number. He would have on the card, 1984, Winslow Homer, number 84. I said, why did you do that? He says, well, I didn't want to send you the same card. He literally did that for hundreds of people. Amazing. That was his tickler system. He also had this little notebook. It was this size of, 4x8 thing, loose leaf notebook that contained all sorts of information. This was not just for his office work. This was for his life. So he was really sort of run by this book. He called it his Vade Mecum, and I think that that's apparently a well-known term for this kind of thing. Vade Mecum in Latin means come with me. So before people had cell phones, that type of thing, they carried, some people, Malcolm, you're sorry, Judge, carried his Vade Mecum around, and it had all sorts of information in it. It had the usual addresses, names, addresses, telephone numbers, blah, blah, blah. It also had his favorite wines. It had what clothes he wore at a particular time. He weighed himself every day. It had his weight for each day, the calories that he had the previous day. Later in life, when carbohydrates became important, carbohydrates were there. All that kind of thing. Poker. He had his poker winnings and losses that were recorded in there. Yes, Judge Muir was a poker player. He was a member of the Ross Club, went to lunch there every day. A lot of his friends were, Ross Club members. And he was a poker player, and they had a weekly poker game. I think it was Tuesdays, I'm not sure what it was. But he played poker, and when he would win, he would put down in the book what he won. When he lost, he put down what he lost. As the years went on, towards the end of his life, and not too far, well, pretty far from the end, but people were starting to die off, okay? His friends were, the poker group was starting to diminish. I happened to be a poker player also. I had a monthly poker game, and we talked poker every once in a while. And so he knew that I played poker. In my poker game, we had modest betting limits, $10 limits. Nobody could bet more than $10 on a hand. You could win 100, lose 100, who knows, whatever. But so anyway, I said, sure, I'll come. He asked me if I could come and sort of join, or at least try out joining his poker group, and I said, sure. I went there. I was horrified by the fact that they had a 10-cent limit. So these guys are like 8 of them, older guys sitting around playing for dimes. I mean, on a really good night, you could win $5.20, and on a bad night, lose $4. I mean, it was amazing. So he put these poker winnings and losses in there, and he claimed on his taxes. This is the amazing thing. He was a tax lawyer, basically. So he was known to be very, very tough on people who were convicted of tax evasion, that type of thing. He didn't want to be a tax evader and go before Judge Muir. But so anyway, he told me that at the time, I don't know if that's true now, but at the time, you had to pay tax on your winnings, but there was no deduction for your losses. So he said he could lose money over the year. I mean, at the end of the year, he would add his winnings and he would add his losses. He could only pay taxes on the winnings without deducting the losses. So if he lost money the whole year, he still had winnings that he had to pay tax on the winnings. But he thought that was really cute. He really liked that fact, because it's never more than like $30 or $40. But he had to pay tax even though he lost money during the year. He did get audited once. He told me he got audited. The auditor came in and put this stuff down before me. Well, first question I have is, what is this thing you have on your income for this watch for $350? What do you have a watch on there for $350? And Judge Muir said, well, I did a favor, a legal favor for a friend of mine, and at Christmas he gave me a watch. I hadn't charged him for the thing. He had never given me a gift ever before, and I realized that he only gave me the watch because I had done this legal work for him. So I considered that to be income. And the auditor said, well, that's all I have. Judge Muir liked a walk to work. He was married for 45 years to Alma York, and they had 5 children together. They lived in Muncie, a beautiful old house, Rose Hill. And I was told that, I didn't know Alma very well, but I was told that she was really a very important factor in the various successes that he had. I wish I had known her better, but she died in 1985, and a few years later, Judge Muir moved to Williamsport. 2 children were out of the house. Moved to a modest ranch house on Grampian Boulevard. And he liked that because he could walk to work, and it was 1.3 miles going down Market Street to Hepburn Street to the courthouse. He did that for several years, and at some point the marshal's office, via Harry Westerdale, Marshal Harry Westerdale, who we sometimes call Dirty Harry for no particular reason, but Harry said, Judge, we don't really like you walking to work down this thing. You try some pretty bad people. People have grudges against you. You've had alleged or organized criminals in court. You've had, people who have been assessed a large damage award against them. There's a lot of people who have grudges against you, believe it or not, and it would be very easy for someone to, have someone pick you off or otherwise harm you because of your walking to work. And so we'd ask you not to do that anymore. Well, that didn't satisfy the judge, so problem, devised a system to overcome the problem. What did he do? He took 15, again, 3x5 cards. On each card, he had a slightly separate way to get to work. So instead of going down Market Street to Hepburn Street to the courthouse, he would go down Franklin Street to, Market Street, then over to Pine Street and to the office, or down Hepburn Street to Hoffman Avenue, go on over to Elmira, go down Elmira, and so on. So he had 15 of these little routes, and each card, had a separate one on, and he didn't know which way he was going to go until that morning. The morning that he left, that morning, he would shuffle the cards, take a card, and he'd go, okay, that's my route. So he would go the route. Never the same, very random, and somehow he satisfied Dirty Harry that was going to solve the problem. He was well known for having systems in his house that basically organized things. The one that his son Tom talked about was a system whereby anything in the house could be found. Everything in the house was noted in a notebook, some kind of book that would say where the thing was. And there was a large number of things up in the attic. And up in the attic, there would be rafters there. Each rafter was numbered, and things would be put on particularly numbered rafters and so forth. So Tom told the story that he needed a cummerbund for some formal event. He said he couldn't find it. He says, Dad, where the cummerbund was? Judge Muir, of course, would say, well, let's look at the book. So pulled out the book, looked under cummerbund, and he said, yeah, it's up on rafter number 6. Go to the right, go to the third box, go to the third portion of that box. You should find the cummerbund. And sure enough, Tom would go up there, blah, 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 go to the thing. There was a box, there was a cummerbund. Everything was, sort of located that way. I had some occasion to be in his kitchen. I think my wife Karen had prepared a meal for him or something, and I was delivering it. And in his kitchen, I noticed at the back door was this 3x5 card that said "Tut out." Tuts, actually it was Tuts, T-U-T-apostrophe-S, out. I looked at the other side of the card, it said Tuts in. Tut was his cat, and cat was an inside-outside cat, so he would let it out, it would come out, or it would come back. He never quite knew where it was, so it could be inside, but it was under some bed, and he couldn't find it. It could have been outside. So, but if he recorded it on this card, he would know if Tut was in or Tut was out. It was very important to him. Someone made the mistake of giving him one of those label makers, those little plastic strips that had things you can type out the label thing. That was dangerous for him because he started labeling everything, and there were shelves in his refrigerator which would say what was on what shelf, etc. Drawers were labeled, and one time he went to the Hurtig House. I remember this. He went to the Hurtig House for dinner, went downstairs, the bathroom, that's where the bathrooms are located, and he was appalled by the fact that the cold water faucet was on the left-hand side, and the hot water was on the right-hand side. And so next time he was at the Hurtig House, he brought his little label maker with him. And he labeled those faucets, cold, hot. And I don't know how long it went on before the Hurtig House changed the plumbing, but I know that at least a year later. Those little labels were still on the thing. He had, of course, everybody in this time frame wore neckties with their suits, but wore neckties generally. I hardly ever saw Judge Muir without a necktie. But every necktie was labeled inside on the back of it with something. Who gave him the tie? You know, Tom, and then a date, always a date of when he got the tie. If he had purchased the tie someplace, it would be the date and where he got it from. You know, Rome, Italy, you know, whatever. But he labeled every single tie, and I'm not sure why he did that, but he, you know, just liked to do those kinds of things. It's sometimes, when you hear these kind of stories, you think, you know, this guy is too regimented, too many systems, his life is run by that. Really, he was a very, very lovely man. I mean, he's well-traveled, he was well-read. It was a real pleasure to go to dinner with him. He was a great storyteller. He played the piano from the time as a child, and he played the piano basically every day. And he had a number of piano compositions that he made, usually in you know, for purposes of a gift to somebody, a relative. He had Ann's piece for his daughter Ann, and Beth Ann's song for Beth Ann Campbell. When his longtime law clerk, Jeffrey Ayers, and his wife Jennifer had their son and named him Malcolm, he wrote a piano piece called Malcolm's Air. And if you ever listen to the documentary that I'm urging you to go look at, if you want to, there's a music score in it, and it basically consists of Malcolm Muir piano compositions. He was actually a practical joker. He liked the idea of practical jokes, was able to take a practical joke against them. One of the things that he did, he said, there's a guy at the Ross Club who bought this, apparently a fancy hat. Everybody wore brim hats. Remember, white collar people wore brimmed hats in his 50s, 60s, 70s. This guy bought a new hat. Apparently it was expensive, and he just was bragging to everybody for weeks about this hat, how it fit, how it was beautiful, how much it cost, etc. So Judge Muir at some point got a little tired of the guy's stories. He bought an identical hat, but a half size larger. And the guy put the hat, his coat on the rack at the Ross Club, and went to the lunch. Judge Muir came in and substituted the hat that he had bought for the guy. So that hat didn't fit so well. It started wiggling around his head. And so he stopped really talking about his beautiful hat, and instead put paper around in there to make it fit. And once he did that, the judge would take that hat and put the original hat back in, and, you know, blah, blah. It went on and on. He had a friend who he had his secretary write little notes to, like as a secret admirer of this man. So there would be a short note saying, I know you don't know me, I know you, I admire you, you know, signed, your secret admirer. And he would send those every couple of months. And this guy kept talking about this secret admirer that he had that kept writing him. And when people went on a trip to Italy or wherever, he would sometimes have them send the notes from Italy. So the secret admirer would be sending notes to his friend. Yeah, that's, those are some of my stories. Cliff and I and others had a 90th birthday celebration for him in October of 2004. We had a surprise trial of Judge Muir. Friends, lawyers, the courtroom was basically packed. I forgot how we surprised him, but somehow we got him in there as a surprise. Judge Neelan, who was the chief judge of the Middle District, presided over the trial. We had testimony. Some of the testimony on some of the things I talked about today was my testimony. Everybody gave testimony against Malcolm Muir. We had a jury, and ultimately he was convicted of being a living legend. And he was. A year or more after his death, the brand new state-of-the-art emergency department at the Waynesford Hospital was dedicated in his name. It is now, if you go up there, you'll see big signs. It's the Malcolm Muir Emergency Department. And we have a portrait of him in his courtroom. Beautiful, I think, portrait, basically commemorating his reputation as a pioneer in the efficient administration of justice, which really summarizes his legacy. I'm going to stop, and I have made it known that anybody who has a Malcolm Muir story is absolutely welcome to come up. I would say there's a 2-minute limit. I'm going to, I will give you 15 seconds notice if you want. But we'd love to hear any stories that anybody might have with respect to Malcolm Muir.
We don't have a microphone, so you have to speak loudly.
Okay. Well, I want to say that I knew Malcolm Muir originally socially. He moved to Muncie in 1950, and his children were just a bit younger than I was, and we had the only swimming pool, so they were in our house virtually every day during the summer, so I got to know the Muirs very well. With many great stories, but he finally, in 1951, he bought a Plymouth station wagon, which was yellow with a white roof, big station wagon with a family of 6 or 7. That was just right. So they went to Eaglesmere with their trailer and their sailboat, and they backed it down the ramp. They put the sailboat in the water, drove the car and the trailer up the ramp, went out sailing, and then sat and watched the car drift back. And in those days, new cars were very hard to get. I'll tell you a quick story about his background. He worked for First McCormick, Muir and Lynn. Our lawyer was Dale First, and we were in a lawsuit in 1954, and we discovered we weren't doing too well. We discovered that Dale was conferring and consulting with the other side. So we fired him and hired Malcolm Muir, and he became our lawyer at that time, and that's the time he also left First McCormick, Muir and Lynn and started Muir, Lynn and Reader. So that's a little bit of this. One last story, typical of him. He's traveling with my sister in Switzerland in 1968. They're walking down the street in Zurich, and here comes a very well-dressed Swiss fellow with a hat, and Malcolm Muir had a hat, so they tipped hats to each other, and Alma said, "Who was that?" Well, that was one of my classmates at Harvard Law. Why didn't you stop and talk to him? Well, I didn't like him then. Why should I like him now? Great sense of humor.
Anyone else about your story? Well, I'll tell one. The one that I was going to tell, I'm not going to tell. I tried it out at the office today, and I thought it was a little too off color, but so I'm not going to tell that one. But I will tell one of my favorite Malcolm Muir stories. I was driving him from Scranton, where he sometimes went to court. Usually we went together. The law clerks went together. For some reason, I got alone with him, and we were driving back, and we were driving my 1980 Volvo, which I was very proud of. And he said, "Have you ever checked the odometer on your car?" I said, no, not particularly. He said, well, let's see if it's accurate. And they had the mile post there, right? So he pulled out a stopwatch, the famous stopwatch, and he said, okay, now you tell me when we're about to pass a marker. So I go, now, he clicks the thing, to see if the next one is 60 seconds later, right? So this goes on for quite a while. Now, I knew in the back of my mind I had to stop for gas, but of course I was fairly new with the job, very nervous about working for this federal judge who was so punctilious about everything. And this went on and on and on until the car rolled to a stop out of gas on Route 8. And I was really upset. I was upset with him. And I turned to him and I said, it's your fault for distracting me. And he felt very badly about it. He said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll flag down a trucker. So I said, no, that's the last thing we need. You'll get killed and then my career is ruined. I will run down, they had phones along the road. I said, I'll run down and I'll call the state police. So I got out of the car and I made him promise that he would not, because I knew he was going to do this, So I said, I beg you, promise me you will stay in the car and not move till I get back. He said, I promise, I promise. I knew he was a man of his word. He promised, he promised. And I ran down, I was on a track team on Division 3 school, not a very good team. I ran down to the phone, grabbed the phone, of course they answer, Pocono Valley State, Police or whatever it's called, State Police. And I say to them, listen, I'm out of gas. And the fellow says to me, well, I'm sorry, sir, we do not help people who are out of gas. You'll have to walk to a gas station. So I said, sir, I have a federal judge in my car who is going to flag down a trucker. He said, oh, well, I'll take it up with my boss. Go back to your car. I turned around, I ran back to the car. By the time I got back to the car, there were 4 police cars with gasoline, filling up my car, cleaning it. I mean, it was dirty, dirty old Volvo. Cleaning it up, putting gas in it, and he's schmoozing with them and chatting with them, talking about the weather, and the markers really are not properly, they're really not a mile apart. They need to check that out, We get back in the car, not another word was spoken about that for the entirety of my relationship with Judge Muir. But it shows how punctilious he was about the details, And that was one of the many stories I could tell, but I don't want to keep anybody here too late. So anybody else have any other stories about the Muir story?
I have just one real quick one. When I went from a part-time judge to a full-time judge, I moved my parking spot from being out in the back in the fenced area to one of the garages. And we had clickers to get in. And he and I were leaving my first night and get to the door, and there's a touchpad there, and nobody had told me what the combination is to get into the garage. And he said, Skip, don't worry, it's easy. It's the 4th through the 7th digits of pi.
And you knew when you got in?
No, he did it that day.
I'll apologize to those of you who were here when I spoke, because you heard the story once before, but for those of you who were not here. When I learned that I was to be the president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, shortly thereafter I was invited by Judge Muir to a reception in his chambers. And I knew that he had been in the chairs to become the president of the PBA, but he stepped out of the chairs when he was elevated to the federal bench. And so I wanted to say something nice to him about the fact that he would have been the president of the PBA. And I said to him, Judge Muir, I just want you to know that I understand that you stepped out of the chairs of the Pennsylvania Bar Association when you were elevated to the bench. Because of that, I will have the great honor of being the first Lycoming County lawyer to ever serve as the president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association. He looked at me and said, Cyrus LaRue Munson. I said, what does that mean? He said, you will be the second. He just wanted to make sure that I wasn't too proud of myself.
Come up here.
My name is Ophelia Feather. Judge Muir made me become an American citizen. So I always think about him. And ever since then, we become friends. And everybody's having a good time. But I want to share with you, the last time I saw him, you know, Market Street, and you turn to the right is Grandview Boulevard, right?
Yeah.
And he was turning that way in his car, and I was going home this way. And he waved to me, and I waved to him, and that's the last time we saw him. And we go out to eat dinner every so often. We had a good time with him.
He had an amazing mind to the very end. I went to visit him at the gatehouse a day or two before he passed away. And when I went in to talk to him, I didn't think he knew who I was. He asked me to get his bedpan for him and treated me like I was, one of the people that worked there. And I was fine, And I went out, and there was a fountain right next to his room. I went out to get some water. I was really upset. And I heard the nurse say to him, "I'll bet you don't know who that was." And in a clear voice, these are the last words I heard him speak, in a clear voice he said, "That was my one-time law clerk, and today he's a very fine lawyer in this community." I really almost passed out. I just was just so blown away, so shocked. And that was and I think it was within a day or so that he did pass away after that. So he had an amazing mind, he really did.
I was there, and someone said, "Who is that?" He says, "I haven't the slightest idea."
He didn't make the same impression.
He really was very, he loved swearing in new citizens to the United States. And one of the things he did is he would, when the swearing-in ceremony was about to happen, he purchased a huge number of copies of the U.S. Constitution with his own money. It wasn't part of the budget, and he would hand that out with a little inscription, usually, to the new citizens coming in. So that was he thought that was an extremely important part of his job.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Ayers. I am married to one of the judge's longtime law clerks, Jeffrey Ayers, and my son is the Malcolm Ayers that was named after Judge Muir. Judge Muir was tickled pink when we told him, when I was pregnant, that if we had a boy, we were naming him after Judge Muir. And he felt more like an uncle to the family, more like a member of the family to us than a boss to my husband. He kept a picture of my son on his desk in his chambers. My son would love to go see Judge Muir in chambers, and he would always look at him and say, "And what's your name, young man?" We thought it would be comical to dress my son up for his first Halloween as a judge, as a baby judge. He had a foam gavel, and I have wonderful pictures of Judge Muir and baby Malcolm in his judicial robe with his foam gavel, two of them holding their gavels. But I miss the judge's sense of humor, and Judge and I were also in the American Inns of Court, and one night I needed a ride back to my house, and I said to him, I said, "Judge," I said, "would you mind," I said, "I don't have my car, would you mind giving me a ride home?" And he leaned over and he said, "Which home? Yours or mine?" And I said, "Well, if it's a condition of my husband's continued employment, of course." So we had a good chuckle over that. He is very missed. I told my son, who is in Florida studying to become a pilot and not a lawyer like his parents, that I was coming to this lecture series about Judge Muir, and he was very disappointed that he wasn't here to hear all the Judge Muir stories. We do have his musical piece, Malcolm Ayers, have it on my phone, so we do get to listen to it on occasion, and we always love to tell Malcolm he has some pretty big shoes to fill.
My name is Carl Benjamin. I wound up at the federal building after 28 years as a trooper and 5 years at McNerney Page, where I was able to control Patty Bowman and Robin Reed, but Mike Collins was not retrievable. In any event, the judge did walk in to work, and we'd have him on the camera. And there was no problem. He walks in, calls me upstairs, and he said, "I'd like you to handle a very serious problem." I said, "I'll be glad to." He said, "I was coming in, a deputy U.S. Marshal in a deputy U.S. Marshal car exited the parking lot from the east side and turned down a one-way street the wrong way." And I said, "Well, that's pretty stiff things, you know." I said, he said, "What do you plan to do?" I said, "Well, I'll discuss it with my supervising deputy." And he looked at me and said, "That was yours." The other one, just a quick one, we're in court, and of course, we keep somebody near the bench. And he looks at me and he says, "Carl, would you step up?" And I went up. He handed me a note. It was a phone call that we made. I took care of it. At the end of the day, I get a call. Well, we numbered the judges for security. Bureau was one, the plural was two. Ask you to search. Number one, Wanshi in Chambers. So I go up. He said to me, "I have an apology." "Really?" "Yes," he said. "Under the circumstances today, you are not Carl. You are Mr. Benjamin, you are deputy, you are sir, but you're never Carl in court." Well, okay, no problem. He said, "Do you accept my apology?" And I knew I had. I said, "Yes, I do, but I feel dirty and used." And he says to me, "You got me that time." But I loved him, okay? I really did. Thank you.
Anyone else? I see people are staying, so any other stories? Well, if not, yes. Oh, no, he's just taking photographs. But we can tell them all night. I'm sure Jack has more, I have more, but thank you for being here, and it's a great crowd, a wonderful tribute to a remarkable, really a remarkable person. So thanks for him, and Jack, thank you, and Art Buckle.